Jewel, it is so wonderful to see you and to have you back at the Mindfulness Summit. It's a real honor to have you with us.
Thank you for having me back.
So, I'm excited to talk to you about a number of different topics. One is mindfulness, creativity, and also how we create a more kind of mindful, thoughtful society. And I've always just looked at you as such a unifying force, both as an activist, as a singer-songwriter. You know, your music, I feel like, inspires so many people. And your work through the nonprofits as well, I think, inspires so many people. So just really excited to have you with us. And thought we'd just start by talking about like how mindfulness kind of became something of interest to you, or whether you felt like that was always something that you had been raised with a certain kind of value on presence, value on paying attention, value on showing up, or whether there were certain moments in your life where you're like, wow, I've been focusing in this way. Now I need to like focus inward and actually discover more about who I am. So I'm curious how that process has happened for you.
Yeah, for me, I was trying to solve a problem in my life, and it was the problem of what do you do with pain? And if you didn't receive good nurture, could you get to know your nature, or were you just screwed? I wanted to believe I wasn't just screwed. And that's a daunting task. I moved out when I was 15, and I knew that kids like me statistically end up repeating the cycle. And again, I didn't want to be a statistic. I didn't want to be a victim of my nurture. So, how do you get to know your real nature when your neural programming has been so bad? I hadn't heard the word neural programming at the time, but I called it emotional English. I realized I was taught actual English in my household, but I was also taught an emotional language. And I could tell that my genetics, I inherited my genetics, and I was also inheriting an emotional language that was generational. My dad grew up in an abusive household. His dad grew up in an abusive household. I'm going to assume his dad grew up in an abusive household. So these thought systems are passed on as much as our genetic systems. How do you learn a new thought system? And I was very, very curious about it when I moved out at 15. And I called it my happiness project.
Mhm.
I looked at nature versus nurture. How do I get to know my real nature? And it started me on this journey. I didn't call it mindfulness because I don't think that word was around then. But I could tell it was like you get wrapped in something and you think your wrapper is who you are, but your
Right.
authenticity is inside of it. And all of our neural wiring, our emotional languages, all of these isms, our interpretations, our misunderstandings is this wrapping. And sadly, we can spend an entire life believing we're the wrapping without ever getting very nourished and going inside and finding our authentic self. So it was a journey that started then and evolved up to this day.
And when you talk about the wrappings and kind of that abusive family, and is when you kind of look at the wrappings, is the wrappings like have phrases around it like I'm worthless or people are untrustworthy? Like is that the kind of wrapping where there's like ingrained thought forms about how life is and who you are? And
You know,
and or how do you see that?
Yeah, our brain learns through pattern matching. And so when we learn colors, for instance, a book or a parent might show us a banana and go yellow. And then we see something like a lemon and we go yellow. And we learn yellow. The word's arbitrary. It could have been called kipple, like for all of them. It's just a word. It's arbitrary. Um, Emotions are like that. So we have a million data points and a very arbitrary word gets put on it, love. But it's a billion data points. It's the way my father treats me. It's the way my mom and dad interact. It's how they handle conflict resolution. It's a lot of things. It's a million data points. And then a very arbitrary word gets put on it, love. So it's what I call emotional dyslexia, when you were given the wrong word to match to the wrong feeling. So in my house, I don't know that that would actually have been a loving experience. I don't know that other people would have thought or called that love, but I called it love. And even though I knew certain aspects of it hurt, my brain still pattern matched. And when it saw similar patterns, was still going to match to that. So yeah,
Mhm.
there's certainly negative self-talk. That's part of it. But it's much more interesting to just go as deep as you can, to start looking at very, very deep misunderstandings and motivations in life, because that's where things start really getting interesting.
Mhm. And you had talked about what you refer to as the authentic self or what's the unbroken. And could you tell, do you feel like you have to kind of go through all of the wrapping to get to that, or is that always there? Or how did that work and how did that work in your kind of journey in your healing process?
The thought has evolved, but the basic principle is that we aren't broken. For me, I suffered a lot of trauma, a very abusive childhood, moved out at 15, homeless at 18. It was very traumatic. All my money disappeared when I was 34. My mom and I's relationship had a lot to do with that. It was a real shit show for me until I was about 34, and I felt very broken. Everything I'd been taught about my life from my mom wasn't true. I mean, you talk
This was
about real,
after a lot of success, after great success, in fact.
yeah, after great success. And so it was a lot of personal betrayal and also a lot of realizing a lot of what I thought about my life wasn't true, that she told me was true. I mean, it was a real head trip. And I was looking in the mirror one day and I remember this allegory, the golden statue. And it's about a village that has a very valuable golden statue. They hear a warring village is coming, so they cover it in mud. War comes and goes. People forget it's golden until one day it rains and they realize, holy smokes, this statue is inherently valuable. For some reason that came back to me and I thought, what if my soul isn't like a teacup? What if I don't have to fix it, right? Because that's a very frustrating proposition your whole life, saying I have to fix myself. Because what that validates is that I'm not good enough. Something is wrong with me inherently. What if I reversed that and came from the opposite angle, that nothing's wrong with me, something's right with me, and my anxiety is my friend. It's trying to tell me that I am not in agreement with my life. And what if I'm not broken, but I just have to get rid of all the mud and layers and hurt and misunderstandings and trauma to see what's already here and whole? That was a very different, much more optimistic journey for me. And it changed the approach of the exercises I started to create for myself, right? Because you start with the hypothesis, I'm broken. Well, you're going to create very different exercises to fix something that's broken. But if your hypothesis is, I exist whole and complete, I have to find my way back to it, you're going to develop very different exercises. So the exercises I started developing for myself were much more about self and other, which got into the wrapper. What is authentic versus what did I confuse for my authenticity? What thoughts did I confuse for my authenticity? Well, the best guide in that is anxiety. Because your anxiety is going to be your blinking neon sign saying that was an inauthentic thought, action, or feeling. So my anxiety became my best friend. Like I wanted it to come closer. I wanted to sit in meditation and go, what are you trying to say? What was I thinking that made me so anxious? It's like food poisoning. If you eat something really bad, your body has a violent reaction. You should listen to that and don't eat that thing again. Anxiety's like that, but it's so weird. We think it means something's wrong with us. Instead of realizing it's like a great car alarm that's saying, ding, 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 that thought doesn't agree with you. Stop having that thought. Stop engaging it, or stop engaging this person or this experience.
And it's interesting that you were able to make that connection. So you're in a very difficult time. Your kind of life is falling apart, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, there's more than the circumstances of my life. It's actually my internal world that has some relationship to my happiness or not. And I think that's a big shift where a lot of people feel like, well, I can't be happy if this is going on in my life. And it seemed like you were able to somehow find a door in.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I'm really glad you brought it up because it really deserves resting on it for a second. How do I describe it? There's two ways of living life, from the outside in or from the inside out. I used mindfulness my whole life to have a better experience of the paradigm I was living in. So if you live in a hammer and nail paradigm, right, everything looks like a nail. I lived in a hammer and nail paradigm, and I used mindfulness to have a better experience over which nails I hit. I was much more thoughtful about which nails I hit. And if I got bonked over the head, I was much more thoughtful about my reaction. Well, that's great. And I got a lot of improvement. I really changed my life. I went from homeless to really famous with that amount of skill. But what I realized more recently was I had to have a whole paradigm shift, right? There's that saying that the cure can't come from the illness that created it. You have to get in an entirely new operating system. That new operating system is coming from the inside out, coming from that authentic core out, rather than just dealing in the wrapper, I guess is a way of saying it. And once you start really believing and investing and being accountable to the fact that our entire outer life mirrors our inner life, that's very different. And a really powerful phrase came to me that peace is not the absence of something, it's the harmony with it. That's a big sentence
Huge.
because we keep trying to control our environment so we can get peace. We want to push out negative people and push out this and push out our anxiety. And that isn't actually what it is. We actually become more precious. And how many New Age and spiritual people do we know where their spirituality makes them more precious, more sensitive to the point where they can't tolerate real life, right? We want our spirituality to make us more resilient, more capable, more gritty in a positive way. And so that idea of it isn't the absence of something, like I can't be happy until this is gone and that president isn't elected. It's coming into the harmony with the truth, because now you're not fighting reality. Now you're no longer in conflict with reality. And now you can say, what does my reality need for me to, what do I have to do? How do I relate to this? And you start living internally. And that is a complete paradigm shift for sure.
And it sounds like you're talking about, well, John Kabat-Zinn uses the phrase, put out the welcome mat, but that there's a way in which you're embracing, whether it's anxiety or some other feeling, that you're welcoming it in, and that there's also this place of discovery or investigation, or of kind of getting to the root of what actually is a part of the process. And I think in our lives, the tendency is to just avoid all that, whether we avoid it with alcohol or technology or TV, or somehow feel like, all right, if I just kind of go to sleep and I wake up, maybe my life will be better. And it seems like the approach that you took was like, no, I need to welcome that and go into it deeper, not avoid it further.
Yeah, and see if there's outer conflict, where is it starting within me? For somebody that says she hated conflict and drama, it's all I ever had my whole life. Statistically impossible. Like the amount of betrayal and crazy stuff that my life turned into, it's mathematically impossible for all that to happen to one person. So at some point you got to look in the mirror and go, what am I missing? There's something I'm missing. And I realized that when we send mixed messages into the world, we get mixed messages back. So everybody talks about boundaries, but if I have a boundary and I'm not willing to uphold it, I just sent a mixed message into the world, right? If I believe that somebody should treat me lovingly, but I let somebody non-loving around me over and over again, what's my word worth? What's my word worth to myself, much less to the universe? But that type of mixed messages brings mixed messages back. And now that seems really clear, but at the time I didn't get it. I'm like, I'm so good-hearted and I'm really trying. And it just didn't make sense, but it's because I didn't really understand the amount of mixed messages that I was sending out into my environment and how that was allowing them all to just keep coming back at me.
And that exploration for you was through all sorts of means, was through journaling, was through meditation, was through, how did you go on that journey? Or was it multiple channels in terms of that beginning to explore that area? Because I think a lot of people might agree with that, but they're like, where do I begin? Like, what's my measure? It's kind of like, how do you become conscious of what's unconscious?
Yes, it's true. And that really is, there's a great saying, perception is power. Right? We're all wondering what power is in this world. We live in a world of false power. Perception is power. The person who can perceive the most wins. That's why mindfulness is so powerful, is because it helps us perceive more. It's been a lifelong journey, but I would say a lot more clarity the last year and a half, probably. I've been writing a book about it. Just sort of about how do you stop working and living in definitions and go into an experience. Right? Mindfulness is about going into an experience, or the welcoming mat, as Kabat-Zinn would say. And then some simple practices. I'm very into practices. I'm into practicable things, because philosophy is great, but it's dead to us if we can't find a way to practice it, because we can't form new neural pathways without a practicable thing. And how many times do we sit in our meditation room and then we step on a Lego and we're cursing like a sailor and screaming at our kid, or, at the grocery store line, and suddenly your evolved nature goes out the window, like we want to be able to change all those habits. So I call it mindfulness in motion. My real passion in life, besides songwriting, has been developing exercises that help take these philosophies and create practices so that I can form new neural pathways, so that I'm not compartmentarizing, so that I don't just feel good when I'm meditating, but I start to see my life transforming. That's the goal. We want change. I guess a simple thing for people to start, if they're looking for that, I guess I would talk about boundaries quickly.
Yeah,
There's
please.
three types of cell walls in our body. There's semi-permeable, permeable, and impermeable. Now, when something gets into an impermeable cell wall, that's pathology, that's sickness, right? That's the definition in the moment of illness. Pathology, something bad goes into an impermeable cell wall. Shouldn't be there, gets in. Our emotional boundaries are the same. We have an open, semi-open, and a closed emotional boundary. And the permeable boundary, the open boundary is just stuff should flow off your back. It should be pretty easy. Where do you want to eat? I don't care. What music do you want to listen to? Whatever. The middle boundary, the semi-permeable, is room for negotiation. We're discerning here. We go, yeah, I'll go to dinner. With the Smiths, not my favorite people, but okay. How long's the dinner? You might put some parameters around it. You're discerning. I can do this, but can we do it like that? And that, yeah, that sounds great. It's a little bit of a negotiation. Your impermeable emotional boundary is a no. It's a no. And a lot of times we think we can't trust the universe. It's that we really can't trust ourselves to uphold a boundary and really stick with it. When we tolerate the intolerable, we become emotionally ill. So just like with a cell wall, if something penetrates it, and that's pathology, if we tolerate the intolerable in our emotional, inner impermeable emotional boundary, that's emotional illness.
Yeah.
So asking yourself, what am I tolerating that's intolerable? That was a huge question for me because I was tolerating a bunch of bullshit and I had a lot of excuses and a lot of reasons to do it. A lot of people I loved and I made excuses for, a lot of excuses I made for myself. But I had to really start looking at what is worth saying no for and drawing a circle on a piece of paper with these other two hoops around it and going, all right, what don't I care about? What's negotiable? What's my no? My health, my relationship with my child, my mental health, my physical health, things like that. I noticed, and you'll notice too now, when people have a deteriorated inner boundary, they get really hypervigilant about the easygoing outer boundary. You get fussy, everything has to be just so, and little things make you uptight. That is the number one sign for me that I need to get back in my hoop, get back into this boundary, that I'm letting something slide here. I'm tolerating the intolerable because I'm getting very psychologically sensitive about stuff I shouldn't be that sensitive about. I think as a nation, if I could describe our nation,
Yes.
that describes us. I think we need to focus more on what really matters, what our real no's are, really. And then we got to learn to negotiate and let the other stuff go. But we're so deteriorated here as humans, as individuals, that we get really uptight about all of this stuff.
And so just kind of following up on that in terms of kind of where our country is at in the US and kind of how you see it. I know, for years, one of the things I've been so inspired by your music is that it feels very uniting and it feels very kind of human thriving oriented. And we're living in a time now where the sense of division is kind of stronger than ever. Like if you're Democrats, the sense of division with the Republican is stronger than ever, Republican with the Democrat, or at least stronger than it's been in a long, long time. And there doesn't seem to be that many unifying forces, everybody seems to be kind of taking a side, whether it's CNN or Fox or whatever the news source or friend. And I'm curious how you see if you're kind of looking at the nation and looking at our own healing and what's going on, what are your thoughts or sense of kind of what lessons or journey we're going through and what might help bring that sense of togetherness more to the forefront and more kind of shared common humanity?
Yeah, I have a really fortunate and amazing fan base because it's just about evenly 50-50 conservative and liberal. It's really interesting. I'm sure there's other fan bases like that, but it seems quite unusual to me. And there's no fighting in my fan base. It's a very supportive fan base. Really early on, my fan group identified the values that we have in common. And we really support each other living those values. How we live those values is up to every individual. And that's like liberty, right? Liberty for all. How I choose to express my liberties might be different than how you choose to express it. And that's where tolerance really comes in, because tolerance, it's only tolerating someone if they really are different from you. It's not actually called tolerance, it's just called being around people that agree with you. And sadly, we've lost the meaning and being able to really live that word. Tolerance means you make room for people that have a different viewpoint, and you do it for each other. And you might really, really disagree with how they choose to live their life, but that's okay. It's not how you choose to live your life. That to me is a really, really important thing, and be able to honor another person that you can still see a sacred thing in them. You can honor a human that has a different viewpoint. A friend of mine came out in the paper with some really homophobic statements. This is a long time ago, maybe 2008. And a liberal friend called me. He's like, how the F can you be friends with this guy? Holy heck. I was like, I don't agree with him. We talk about it all the time, but I don't agree with him. He's like, well, how can you be friends with that person? I was like, because I believe in tolerance as a value. He doesn't believe when I believe in either. I do believe if we're friends long enough, we're going to have a good positive influence as we evolve as humans. And evolution's hard. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen by shaming somebody or screaming at someone. So if it's anything, it's that I think I see extremes on both sides being incredibly hypocritical. It's saying, I want this liberty, but you can't have that one. And this side says, but I want this liberty, but you can't have that one. It's intolerant. It's just a different side of the same coin. For my very, very liberal fans, I encourage them to go get to know a Trump supporter. I know a lot of Trump supporters in Texas. And if I needed a favor, if my life depended on it, I would call them first thing. These are very good people, very dependable, good, salt of the earth people. And they're not understood. Nobody quite understands, why do you like Trump? What's going on? Nobody's really sitting down and asking them. And sadly, no Democratic leaders are either, which is kind of odd to me. And the same with the other side. My conservative friends just think, non-binary is the weirdest thing they've ever heard of, but they're not going to sit down and have a conversation. So I think people should initiate whatever makes you uncomfortable. Go, okay, this is where I get to live my value. I want to understand it better. Yeah. But we think we have to change everybody's mind. And when you're starting off from that viewpoint, it's just not going to work very well. But again, how we express our liberty is different. But I want to honor the values that make us the same and really build those values and build that we value those things being consistent and acted on, and how are you doing it, and supporting each other. You create enough psychological safety for people to show up. And that's a big deal. There's no psychological safety in any communities hardly for people to show up and evolve. I mean, right. We live in a cancel culture where if you aren't perfect and you don't have it figured out, you're canceled. Nobody's perfect. So it's just a very hard environment right now to try and evolve in. And so we get rigid and tight and we act like we know what's right, even if it isn't. And we're afraid to evolve because we don't want to admit it's wrong. I mean, it's really a difficult situation.
No, I hear you. And I think one of the big things that I've noticed is, I think it happens with women, but men have such a hard time admitting mistakes or admitting like, oh yeah, that was bad of me, or that was wrong of me, or I didn't do that well. And then there's this kind of like protectiveness, right? Of like, I can't let down that guard. I can't show any vulnerability, or else, I don't know, the sky's going to fall down. And when I see so much of the political discourse, and I see it in myself too, it's like, don't let your guard down. And so we just become more kind of tightly wound. So of course, any little thing is going to set us off. And I feel like that's why the mindfulness practice is so kind of engaging and so encouraging to me, because at least it gives us kind of one path, as is journaling, or as is kind of different forms of mindfulness. It gives us some form of going like, okay, instead of making the enemy outside, I'm actually going to stop and look at what my stories are and what I'm putting out into the world. And to me, there's such an opportunity that we have now, because we've kind of taken that other one to extreme. We're all so tightly wound that I don't know if we can pull that rubber band any longer. And so I do feel that there's this energy now that's like, this sucks. This sucks to live this tightly wound and this much division, this much anger and hatred. What's the other way? And so I am excited by I feel that there's some sense of opening for people to begin to discover that, but we also need a lot of guidance and support, right? Like when you were having your hardest times, or I'm having my hardest times, it's really helpful when there's somebody there. It's like, all right, Jewel, what's going on? Let's talk about this, or let me be there for you. And so I love that feeling of like, can we have that sense of together, and that I can fall apart, and that that's actually a strength. It's not a weakness.
Yeah, creating a psychological safety for people to show up in, to be vulnerable in, to evolve in, to be imperfect in, is valuable. You know, I would love to see us each committing in our social, just even on our social channels, to really sticking up for and creating that type of environment. And also within ourselves, because, you know, I'm hardest on myself as anyone else. You know, if I mess up, you know, that perfectionism's a son of a gun.
Yeah.
It rides me hard. You know, it's hard. You start to see it inside of you, is what I'm saying. You know, all the things that are manifesting outwardly are because they're erupting inwardly. And the more thoughtfulness, the more compassion. You know, I was very surprised to realize I suck at compassion. I always thought of myself as a compassionate person. I'm empathetic and I'm caring, but actually compassionate, I was never very compassionate to myself. It was a survival tool, you know, like figure it out, culture, get up, pick yourself up, culture. It was kind of how I kept going. But I never really did have a soft place for myself. It was like, oh my gosh, you poor thing. Like, I couldn't do that for myself. It wasn't in my environment, I guess. I don't really know. It's a skill I've had to learn, and then to learn to extend to other people too.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. And I'm curious how that, because I know you're a mother, and I know that, you know, parenting is a very deep place in your heart. And I'm curious what your lessons are in there in terms of supporting your son to kind of be as kind of conscious, or creating a learning environment for him. How is that journey and discovery going?
Mindfulness as a parent is the best thing ever. I'm really glad I had a lot of practice and looked at a lot of my things prior to having a child. But when you have a child, it triggers neurology that never gets stimulated before. So you have a whole new round and batch of things to learn and go through. It's an amazing thing to give him skills, to watch him on his own when he gets frustrated, take a deep breath without me prompting him. You know, when you see stuff like that, you're so proud. I also see negative things, you know. I'm very curious. If I see a problem, I'm instantly in there with my little going, what is that? Why is that? What's the root of it? What's the cause of it? I was doing that to my son. That's not a nice feeling, I don't think, as a kid, right? When your mom's like, what are you feeling? What's the root of it? He's 7, you know? And when I realized that, I was like, oh, Jewel, like, you got to lay off. Like, keep it really simple. But again, it was my mindfulness that let me even see it. So it's just an amazing evolution. And with him, really teaching him boundaries, you know, what I'm writing this new book about called This Hoop, to let him know that he has his space in the world and that he's responsible for it. And his one job in life is to fill his space with his energy and not get pulled out, not let people in. If I had that one practice, I don't think anything like what happened with my mom would have been able to, because I would have known the difference between self and other, appropriate and inappropriate. That one thing alone to be able to teach him is such a gift.
And just to be clear, what happened with your mom was an embezzlement situation, or distrust on multiple levels, for those people who maybe don't know that, or who are not familiar with what happened with your mom.
Yeah, I'll be careful with words, but my mom was my manager, and when I was 34, I realized I was broke.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that.
It's simple, broad
So,
stroke.
so that's why understanding boundaries, in part, not only that, but lots of situations. And what's fascinating to me is I don't hear the word boundaries and mindfulness often in the same sentence, because there's a sense of, expansion, a sense of like openness and open-heartedness, which is all wonderful. And what I hear you're saying is, in order to fully be that open-hearted person, we have to know where our no's are, and we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in that process.
You have to create your own safe space. Yeah. So that safe space we're talking about creating for community, we have to create it within ourselves. If I don't know I have good yeses and nos, that they're appropriate, and then I will back them up, how can I relax? Because I'm going to have to be on defense all the time. The only way you can lead an undefended life, where you can sit in a space and in your energy and not use all your energy to defend and survive, is knowing you have appropriate yeses and nos in the right places, and that you'll back it up. Once you know that, it's like your whole psychology can now relax, because you recognize the places to say no. I had them all backwards before. I was saying yes to the wrong things, no to the wrong things. I mean, it was really a mess. But once I started to get them straightened out, it's like my whole psyche could relax, because I knew I had my back, as it were.
And could you give us an example of a no? Because I think some people hear this and it sounds good, and they might be like, I don't even know what a no is,
Yeah.
right? Because we're not taught or not. So is there, a kind of an example that you could give where you were allowing something to happen, but then you realized it was a no? And also, what does it mean to then stick to that? Does it mean, what does that process look like?
Yes. Yes, I can. There's
Without
a
getting too, I
couple.
don't want to get too personal, but if there's,
No, I mean, my life's an open book. Why do you say no in life, Jewel? I didn't even have a no. I know it's funny. It was because of a misunderstanding. I thought my purpose was more important than I was. I never knew I thought that, but I thought if I serve my purpose, I've been very purpose driven. I'm super lucky. I've always felt like my purpose is to help people in life. It's a nice thing to feel like you have a purpose. But I thought my purpose had more value than me. I never thought I had value. I had a really, really crippled sense of self-worth. And I thought if I serve my purpose, that gives me worth and everything will work out. Well, I served my purpose to the point where I exhausted myself. I nearly ruined my health irretrievably. I let people take advantage of me because I just tried to keep giving. And then I'd get mad at the universe. Why does the universe keep betraying me? Well, I never had a no. So why do you say no? It's a very good question. For me, it came down to one simple thing. I say no to choose nourishment. Sounds kind of like a funny thing, but consider every type of energy in the world as some form of nourishment, like food. There's food you're going to want to eat and food that's pretty poisonous. And if you want to stick up here in the highly nutritious, good food. Energy's like that. All energy is nourishment, right? We see a lot of people getting energy from negative feedback. It's just not the best, highest calorie, great nourishment. So because of this emotional dyslexia, I only kind of saw the bad nourishment as nourishment. I didn't even see the other types of nourishment, energetic feedback that was out there that was possible. So a lot of my life was depleting. I kept making choices that depleted myself. I kept confusing poison for nourishment.
even
All my
when there's
relationships.
20,000 fans in an audience and you're singing or you're in Times Square, and even in all those moments of great attention,
Oh, that
there's
doesn't feed
something that
you.
wasn't met. Am
Yeah,
I?
that type of attention doesn't actually feed you. I don't know why I always knew that. It's humbling and you're engaged in your purpose. That does feel good. That is very nourishing. It's like when you see a racehorse run, they're built to do that. I was built to do this, and when I do it, I feel great.
Got it.
But the adulation isn't nourishing. If it was, every celebrity would be doing really good. It's just adulation, and oddly, it's the same thing as hate. Neither of them know you, so it's impersonal. Whether a person is giving you all of their adulation when they don't actually know if you're a good person or not, or if they're hating you because you're famous, it's the same thing. It's oddly isolating and lonely. It makes you feel lonely. It made me feel lonely, at least. The things that nourish you are your personal relationships, your choices and what you do with your life and your time and the type of
And that's
job
why
you
you
have.
say no. You say no to protect and support what's nourishing. Am I hearing you right?
So I did it, I tried to do it all off of one. So there's one saying I'm going to give you, and I love the sentence. It's what we take refuge in, our life revolves around.
Okay.
What we think keeps us safe, our life will revolve around that. That's a really profound sentence. And it took me a long time to sit and go, what do I take refuge in? What do I believe keeps me safe? If you believe anger keeps you safe, everything's going to piss you off. Everything. If you think ambition keeps you safe, everyone's going to look like a stepping stone. If you believe kindness keeps you safe, you better believe kindness will save your life at some point. So what did I take refuge in? It was curiosity. I took refuge in curiosity. I believed curiosity would keep me safe. That's what I moved out with when I was 15. I was curious, how am I going to figure this out? How do I not be a statistic? Well, curiosity's really annoying cousin is hypervigilance and doubt. It's a very mental thing. So my curiosity turned into hypervigilance, turned into extreme anxiety and worry, wondering everything that's going to go wrong. It was a misuse of my creativity, a misuse of my curiosity. So what do I take refuge in? I changed it to nourishment. Because since everything in my life depleted me, if I turned it into just black and white, really simple terms, my life depleted me. I want my life to nourish me. What if I took refuge in nourishment? It's the one thing I haven't tried. I've tried lots of things. So now when I don't do good on a book project or I mess up, I go do something nice to myself. It's very counterintuitive to how I was raised. I go for a walk, I get a massage, and it's wild because it causes this chain reaction of things, right? Self-compassion, self-care, lots of things. So to make it simple, again, we need simple things because life is so confusing. I want one answer that I can put into the algorithm. I pick nourishment. So when I choose why I say no, it's to nourish myself. It's to have fun. And I list things that are nourishing.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and
Really
just
appreciate
being
it.
yourself and continuing to shine your light in the world.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Nice to see you.